everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm your host, Charles Max Wood, and this week we're talking to Michael Galarnyk. Now, Michael, you are a developer relations at AnyScale. You are an author. I need to find your book title. What's your book title?
Well, not necessarily an author. I write a lot. I'm a LinkedIn Learning author. So I make courses,
okay.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
That sounds more smarter than anyway. You're an instructor, Stanford Continuing Studies. I'm feeling inadequate now. You said you're approaching 10,000 followers on Medium, which is impressive. I remember getting 10,000 followers on Twitter, and I was just like, yay. But Medium, you're actually contributing to people, which is awesome. And yeah, some of your articles, that's how we found you, which is also exciting. I mean, there's just so much going on in the machine learning space that's exciting and impressive. And you're using some tools, mostly we've been talking about like TensorFlow.js, things like that. You're kind of off in a little bit of a different tool set, different approach. And I was like, this looks cool. Let's dive into this. So I may ask you some pretty basic questions about pandas and stuff like that and see where kind of you live. I'm also not a Python developer by any means. So yeah, but let's dive in and talk about this approach, and then we can kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what we're doing and see where we end up at. Does that sound good?
Sure. Sounds great.
When I went freelance, I was still only a few years into my development career. My first contract, I was paid $60 an hour. Due to feedback from my friends, I raised it to $120 an hour on the next contract. And due to the podcasts I was involved in and the screencasts I had made in the past, I started getting calls from people I'd never even heard of who wanted me to do development work for them because I had done that kind of work or talked about or demonstrated that kind of work in the videos and podcasts that I was making. Within a year, I was able to more than double my freelancing rates, and I had more work than I could handle. If you're thinking about freelancing or have a profitable but not busy or fulfilling freelance practice, let me show you how to do it in my Dev Heroes Accelerator. Dev Heroes aren't just people who devs admire, they're also people who deliver for clients who know, like, and trust them. Let me help you double your income and fill your slowdowns. You can learn more at devheroesaccelerator.com.
Now, did I miss anything that would make you sound even smarter and myself a little less adequate?
No, I mean, you got to just about everything. And a lot of stuff I do is very basic. So I think most people should be able to follow along.
All right, good deal. So we invited you to talk about speeding up scikit, learn model training. And this one's on the KD Nuggets, which isn't on Medium, incidentally. Just a side note, I'm kind of curious. How do you decide where these blog posts go, one blog versus the other?
Well, so a couple things. So it depends on who I'm writing for. So sometimes, occasionally I used to ghostwrite, so they would decide, and the article's out there in the wilderness and not associated with me in any way. But oftentimes I decide I'll write it on my Medium blog or whatever because it's easy. And then people would reach out hey, could I republish your blog post on my website?
Right.
With the canonical link linking back to the Medium blog.
Okay.
So yeah.
So is this one of those?
Key Nuggets blog actually it is on Medium, and then people want to republish it. So same thing with other things I've written over time.
Okay, good deal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I occasionally get that for the podcasts as well, but typically it's more along the lines of the blog posts. I blog a whole lot less frequently than you do, though. But yeah, let's dive in here. So you wrote this blog post about scikit-learn. Am I saying that right?
Scikit-learn, yes.
And yeah, just kind of give us, before we get too deep into this, rundown of scikit-learn, because I've heard of pandas, but I haven't heard of scikit-learn.
So scikit-learn is a really easy library to use for machine learning. Mm-hmm. And it's very much import the model you want to use, make an instance of your model, fit your model data, and then predict. That's basically in real simplistic terms. The thing is that a lot of machine learning libraries by default only use a single core in your computer. So my MacBook, for example, that I'm doing this podcast on, has 8 cores. And if I'm only using a single core, it's kind of inefficient, so to speak, because theoretically, assuming I had perfect parallelization, I could have an 8 times speed up if I'm training my model and it was very parallelizable, all 8 cores or all 4 cores, if you have 4 cores in your computer. So that's the idea of the article itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm on a MacBook Pro. And yeah, I think it has 8 cores as well. And yeah, same boat, right? Yeah, use all the cores, do all the work, right?
Yeah, you have a lot of resources, and if you don't use them, then you're potentially wasting time or money, depending on like what you care about.
Yeah, I'm primarily a Ruby developer, and we're getting a lot of parallelization tools, and that's been kind of the discussion there for our programs is, yeah, how do we get the work running on more than one core so that we can, effectively get it done more efficiently so we can get what we want faster. So how
The
do
other
you go
thing is
about
if
doing
you're
this? What was
oh,
that?
sorry. The other thing I forgot to mention is if you're doing this on like AWS or Azure and you have an instance and it has all these cores you're not utilizing, you're wasting a lot of money.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense because absolutely they do charge you by the core and for the memory and the storage. But yeah, by the core is one of the parameters you're paying for. So you may as well take advantage of it. How do you go about getting this done?
Well, so a couple of things. The first thing is decide if you actually need to utilize all the cores in your computer, because if you're running things and it's already fast and efficient, well, then what we're talking about is pretty useless. So the way you can really get this done is I can talk about other ways to speed up model training where you don't have to utilize all your cores if you don't need to. But there's a backend for scikit-learn called JobLib. And essentially you can switch out different execution engines, essentially, or backends, and utilize all the cores in your computer. There's a lot of them. You've probably heard of them. So there's Loki, which you've probably not heard of, but there's Ray, there's multiprocessing, there's Dask. And you can basically switch out scikit-learn's backends from like JobLib with Loki backend to Ray, multiprocessing, or Dask. So it's really just about taking a different backend and then having it work for you. And these backends take care of things like scheduling tasks across like all your cores, dealing with other things. And of course, you can also not just parallelize it across your one computer, you can also schedule it across different nodes. So if I consider my laptop like one node with, let's say, 8 cores or 4 cores or whatever, scikit-learn also with JobLib's backend of Ray allows you to make it work across multiple nodes or multiple computers. So I kind of just rambled all over that, but essentially just use JobLib and use a backend like Ray, multiprocessing, Dask. So,
well, some of these libraries that I've used in the past across different technologies will use multiple processes instead of multiple threads. That's why I'm asking, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, like Ray itself is like a whole nother ball game, which you can talk about later if you like. But the Ray project, if you want to look it up on GitHub, it's basically like a core ecosystem, very general purpose that allows you to scale your Python applications without really rewriting them. You got decorators essentially, and then you can make your Python code running a single core, run multiple cores or across like multiple clusters or machines.
Right.
And it really just a way to make it's a framework that handles machine failures pretty well and does things with high performance. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'm wondering about a little bit with some of this is that as I've moved some programs from single core to multi-core, I've run into like race conditions or other situations where I've run into concurrency issues. Are these algorithms set up in such a way to where that's not an issue? Or do you have to start thinking about setting, mutexes or other ways of isolating shared data in order to avoid certain issues?
So the beauty about like these backends for scikit-learn in this case, I mean, most of the backends can do other things, but JobLib in this case takes care of all that stuff for you. They've really hyper optimized most of these processes for a lot of different algorithms. Certain backends do it better than others in certain cases. It's just about the implementation of a specific algorithm, but they're really, really good because scikit-learn itself is a very, very popular library. So they've optimized it. There's edge cases if you have like a algorithm no one has used in like years, maybe you'll have an issue, but you don't have to think about it. It really is change a couple lines of code and go.
Oh, nice. Okay. That makes sense. So then you just grab this JobLib, and this is specific to scikit-learn. So you're not going to use it for anything else.
It could be used for other things, but for the most part, that's how it's used.
Okay.
At least in the context of this article. So JobLib, just FYI, it's a tool for like lightweight pipelining in Python. So people use it for other things, but how I see it used, at least in the machine learning context for like scikit-learn, is very, very straightforward.
Okay. So how much glue code did you have to write then?
Almost nothing. I mean, in terms of like JobLib, it really is changing one line of code for scikit-learn models. Like it's really extraordinarily simple, which is how it really should be. So essentially, when you're running an algorithm for scikit-learn, when you import your model, and then when you're making your instance of your model, you can set an nJobs parameter. And this basically, you can specify how many cores you want, or if you want to make things run across multiple machines. So for the core example, it really is just specifying cores. So n_jobs equals like 4 cores or 8 cores. Or if you can have it automatically detect how many cores you have in your computer as well. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you get in, you've got your algorithm, you hook this bad boy up and you say, okay, run across all my cores or run across a certain number of my cores. It starts running your algorithm and doing the training. Do you need this to run the model once it's trained, or is this only for the training end of things?
So are you saying it's typically only for the training end of things?
Right.
Yes, you probably can use it for predicting. But the idea is that the training process for machine learning just takes a lot longer than the prediction stage. So
yeah, because you're throwing all your data at it at once, as opposed to whenever you have something you wanted to predict, right?
Yeah. As far as making things fast for prediction, there's other ways to make that happen.
Right.
So that's almost never the bottleneck, at least in a lot of basic machine learning.
No, that makes sense.
For model surfing, that's very different. You want things to happen very quickly, and there's ways to productionize machine learning. But
so you get this all hooked up, you're feeding data in. You can also run it across multiple machines. How does that work?
So that is probably a topic for another podcast, I would say. But really, you first of all, you have to set up things on AWS. You have to choose the appropriate backend. So typically for when you do things for like cross multiple machines. So JobLib has a couple essentially execution engines they can use. So you can use like Dask Array as an execution engine. And for that, you just have to make sure you choose Dask Array. If you try to use like JobLib's Loki backend or multi-processing backend, it doesn't really make much sense. It will just happen over multiple cores, not multiple machines. So if you use Dask Array, it'll just do it for you, essentially.
Okay. You can't like run it across a MacBook and then a Linux machine and then whatever else I have sitting around my office.
If you do things very efficiently and the frameworks allow it. Typically, when you do this, though, you typically work over one operating system. That's the ideal case, right?
Yep.
I mean, I hope so, at least. Because most of these frameworks, when you have like multiple, like, let's say you're using like large, like M5X, 5.8X large nodes, it all helps if they're all the same. Or they're just AWS instances rather than local machine and instance. I should note with all this that it comes with the caveat that some algorithms are more parallelizable than others. So like, let's say for random forest, for example, where you essentially have an ensemble model of a bunch of trees coming together to make a prediction. A random forest is very easy to parallelize because when you have your model, you essentially bootstrap data. So you have a bunch of sample to replacement data. And then from each of the bootstrap samples, then you grow decision trees, right? Those decision trees are really easy to grow apart from each other. And when you have that, it's really easy to parallelize. Whereas some algorithms, yes, you can parallelize them, or there's tricks to make them parallelizable, but they're not as parallelizable as a random forest, for example.
Right.
So, one thing I always tell, like when I teach students, is that whenever you choose a model, some models have advantages and disadvantages. Some of them are really understandable. Like you can tell your boss, like, oh, here's how this model works really easily. Like typically the tree-based models. Some models are extraordinarily high performance. So especially if you have a lot of data like neural networks and such, but they're not always as understandable. So different models, different strengths and weaknesses.
Right. So I'm just trying to think through all the implications here. So when you're throwing your data on I'm assuming you have some kind of load balancer on the front end then that you put all your data into one place and then it figures out where to send the data, right?
Mm-hmm. It's pretty efficient. Most of these frameworks will take care of all that stuff for you, especially for scikit-learn, which is a very, very, very easy to use framework. The idea is that you don't have to manage that stuff yourself as much. So it's highly efficient doing it itself.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of the day, then you have a prediction model that you can just take and plug into whatever, plug into scikit-learn on your local machine or onto a system in the cloud in scikit-learn, and it'll just run.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. You can obviously pick a model if you want, use it from there. You can save the weights of the model and then productionize them to something else. There's a lot of different things you can do.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium.
So what have you done this with? What kinds of models have you trained this way?
So typically these days, at least for what I do a lot of teaching. So a lot of my job is not actually programming anymore. It's really just showing students how to do it. So for the example I gave before, a lot of it's with random forests. Even for logistic regression models, you can parallelize them. So if you have some models are by default meant for a single class classification.
Mm-hmm. So
is this cancer or is this not, based on some entry level data. But if you have multi-classes, for the really simple digits example where you're trying to classify something as one number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and why you use logistic regression, I don't know. It's a terrible model for that. But essentially, if you have one versus many or one versus all, where you have multiple models and the most likely model is what you land up predicting, that's very parallelizable. So if you have a lot of these sort of models and you're trying to figure out this model is 65% confident it's this versus this other model is 40%, you choose the most common. So logistic regressions, the random forest, the very simple sort of models is typically what I use this for. Additionally, if you want to do something like a gradient boosting model, this scikit-learn framework is not going to be the most efficient for what you want to use or what you want to do. For that, you typically use XGBoost or a gradient boosting framework.
Gotcha. So let's change gears just a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about blogging and developer advocacy that you're doing?
So developer advocacy developer advocate. So
yeah. So
hopefully I can say my job title properly. Yes.
Maybe. And the teaching, that's all really fascinating as well. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the blogging first, because I've been running this developer influencer accelerator for folks, mostly focused around podcasting. And I'm a little curious if somebody wanted to get into blogging, do you have any words of wisdom for them?
So the first thing, and this is probably the most important thing, is you have to start. And one thing about blogging is you don't have to know everything that you write as long as you source it. So when I'm talking to you on a podcast, for example, I'm not always fresh on oh yeah, what did I do exactly or whatever. Blogging is a great way to learn. So think about why you're blogging so you actually land up doing it. That's probably the most important part. So for me, the first thing is decide why you're blogging and what your topic's going to be. So as far as choosing topic, decide are you blogging to get a job? Get your name out there? Are you blogging just for fun? Are you trying to share your work's technology or your work's outcome? So it's assessing your goals essentially. And as far as choosing the specific topic, find out what's not out there, then try to put it out there. If it's already out there, you can always do something better. A lot of blogs out there are really terrible. So if you do something better than what's currently out there, you'll get views. If the goal is to get views, do something better than someone else has done.
Yep.
The other thing is once you publish a blog, you can always change it. So there are blogs I've had back in the day where they'd get 2 views over or 2 views a day over 30 days or whatever. So just nothing. And what ended up changing was I realized that quality is probably better than quantity in a lot of cases.
Right.
For YouTube, it's the exact opposite. You just want to get content out. And if it's not as great, you can kind of figure it out or improve it over time. Of course, having lots of content in high quality is great. It's not always realistic. So like I've had blogs and I just rewrote over time and got them better. So like they used to go from like 2 views a day to like 500 views a day now.
Right. That's really interesting because podcasts somewhere in the middle. But yeah, most of your advice as far as just starting out, that's what I tell people too. It's just like, look, you just get going. I mean, there's some fundamentals you have to have. You have to have artwork and you have to be able to record the audio and stuff. But yeah, just getting stuff out there. You have to know why you're doing it. Yeah. So what outcome? You're doing it to get a job. You're doing it to become well known. You're doing it to sell a product. Yeah. All of that stuff applies equally here. And then the difference is with blog posts, the quality makes sense, right? And you're essentially playing the who's going to share it and SEO game to get found. With YouTube, it's the algorithm game and getting people to keep coming back to your channel. And with the podcast game is to get people to subscribe, because once they're subscribed, it'll keep pushing the next episode to their phone. And so, it's just understanding how people consume the content and get more of it. But
I think the difference also that you mentioned with like podcasts versus YouTube versus like blogs is like I flubbed a lot of this like episode, this like podcast. I'm like,
we'll clean it up. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, but like that's fine. But and I listen to it and try to fix it for like later stuff. But for blogging, you can fix it later.
Yeah.
And that's the power of a blog. Like I have old YouTube videos out there and they are terrible. Just like, what was I doing with my life? I can't go back and fix the or there's a really terrible video for like PCA for me out there where I just say like, okay, like 1,000 times. Just terrible video. Whereas like blogging, you can always improve it over time. So for blog, it's probably the easiest barrier to entry versus like podcasting, YouTube, I would say.
That's true. That is very true, because all you have to do is type it, right?
Yeah.
And then you can go back and fix it later.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing, is just get it out there and make it better over time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of actual like studies about people are more likely to read your blogs if you actually put time into them. So you can always post it, then just increase the effort in there over time.
Cool. I want to ask you a little bit about developer advocacy as well, because typically we get people on and they're either like hardcore PhD candidates or they're enthusiasts, but they're like way down in the weeds of, hey, I'm building these algorithms and it's way fun. We typically don't get people who are more on kind of I think of developer advocates as kind of straddling the spheres of the technologist and the marketing. And so, first of all, do you want to just kind of explain what your typical day or week or maybe even month looks like? And then talk about how you got into it and what kind of person ought to be thinking about kind of making that career move as opposed to staying in the technology.
So like software engineering, like a lot of different jobs, it really depends on the company you're working for. So developer relations is typically, I say it's typically because it's not always true, is often about more than just writing code. So it's like about building relationships, getting feedback from other teams, getting feedback from your users, sometimes helping like users like work through challenges. So some ways like helping others with their code, and basically trying to grow a community in a lot of cases. So they vary like very widely. So I'll tell you about like what like DevRel's, like what I do, and then I can talk about like what other people do, because what I do is probably very different than what other people do. So like for my job, I work at AnyScale, which is basically about making like a universal laptop, like scaling your laptop to the cloud. So I work at a smaller company, and it's a great company, and we work on the RAPE project, which you should start on GitHub. But I mean, so some of it's, marketing or putting plugs in or whatever. So a lot of my work is about like writing about distributed computing. This can be like writing it myself or editing things. It could be things like if I'm making content, sometimes it's about like advertising like a conference, like the Race Summit conference coming up. So you can see like a lot of it's like putting in different plugs for different things you're working on. So some of it for a lot of people is like working on documentation and answering questions on various forums. So like some companies, it's really important to just get feedback from users, help them out. So that's one thing. If you're on the more marketing end of things, sometimes you also might take like a bit of a content marketing approach. So this could be like if you're active on Twitter or LinkedIn or sometimes depending on what you're doing, it can even graphic design like a pinch. So that's like, it really is gain the, like, it's very much a gambit kind of job.
Right.
A lot more common thing if you're at a bigger company is sometimes you write code for production occasionally. This can be things that are like frontward facing code, like code for documentation or code for a product, give demos. It depends on what your job is. Developer relations is just this giant amount of stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if it's essentially, just to keep it really short, it's very widespread for small companies, and for big companies, it's a lot more like exact.
Right.
So always look at a job description and then ask the interviewer, like, what are you doing or what the job is.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, before we do picks, if people want to find you online or connect with you in some way, where do they typically do that?
So it can be on Twitter at Galarnyk Michael, and I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to add me, chat with me, whatever. You can also, I guess, reach out through any other way possible. If you Google my name, you'll probably see a bunch of random things. So feel free to contact me through those mediums. Yeah, whatever works.
All right. Sounds good. We'll put links to as much of that as we can find on the show notes. And if you want to put any of that in the chat, that also will wind up in the show notes. And then, yeah, let's go ahead and do picks.
Hey, folks, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been working a lot on figuring out how to help people become the most valuable developers on their teams, or becoming the top 5% of developers in the field. If you're looking to level up, figure out how to contribute more, get the career you want, get the career that you want that will support the lifestyle you want, then you should check out the Most Valuable Dev Summit. I've invited some of my friends across the community, people that you've heard of, people that have worked on systems that you use on a daily basis, people who have invented new ways of doing things over the years in programming, and I've asked them one question, and that question is, how do you become a top 5% developer? How do you become 1 in 20 of the best developers out there? And so we're going to go ahead and have that conversation with them in interviews on the Most Valuable Dev Summit, and you can find that at summit.mostvaluable.dev.
I'll go ahead and go first, so you can kind of just see how I do it, and then we'll let you shout out about whatever you feel like. So I'm going to shout out about a few things. The first one that I'm going to shout out about, I've been reading these books. The next book in the book series came out, and that's why I've been reading them. It's The Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. And yeah, the next book came out in October of last year or something. And I'm just slow getting through them because I typically listen to podcasts and then I listen to business books and stuff. And so I kind of listen to those when I have spare time or just kind of chilling or going to sleep. And so, yeah, I'm getting through Edge Dancer, which is kind of the novella. It's not really one of the books, but it's between books 2 and 3. And anyway, so that's something I've been enjoying. I've actually been to Cosmere House because it's over by my kid's school. I live in Utah, and one of my friends helps manage the warehouse where he sends out all of his stuff.
Wow.
You can go order stuff like T-shirts and socks and stuff. And yeah, one of my friends from high school works for him. So he's like, "Do you want to come see Cosmere House?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
Of course. I mean, I used to listen to his Mistborn saga.
Yeah.
It was such a good series. He's been writing for so long. It's just absolutely amazing.
He's so prolific too.
I think it's the biggest thing. You have authors that you really like and sometimes don't read often. I'm looking at you, Patrick Rothfuss.
Yeah.
The Name of the Wind, that whole series. Book 2 was published in 2008, maybe. The Wise Man's Fear. I'm still waiting for it.
Yep. Yeah, and apparently he hates it when people ask when book 3 is coming out, but I don't think it's unreasonable given that it's been 12 years.
Yeah,
anyway.
I would say that's probably, that or just say I'm not writing right now or I'm taking a decade break or whatever.
Yeah, or two.
But, yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, I just finished Words of Radiance and I've been reading Edge Dancer and I've been enjoying that. So that's one pick. And then, yeah, the other pick that I have is I just bought a truck. Now it's not a new truck. It's a 1994 F-250. And the people that I bought it from, they had gone to junkyards and stuff and had fixed it. So it runs great. But yeah, I'm just going to advocate for buying used cars because I don't think I've ever, besides the cars that I buy for my wife for her to get around in, I don't think I've ever spent more than $3,000 on a car that I drive. And I usually am able to find decent vehicles. And so I'm pretty happy with that. And yeah, I just found it out of local classifieds, which is still a thing. So I'm going to shout out for local classifieds.
Actually, I'll give a shout out on my end. I wrote a blog about the cost of financing a car. Like, if you just Google it, I really agree with you about trying not to buy new things. It's extraordinarily expensive. You look at like compound interest rates and origination costs for loans. It's ridiculous. I think there's a lot of people out there that talk about like how much Americans lose by car payments. So if you have like a $30,000 car and your car payments, let's say $600 or $700, whatever it is, $500.
Ouch.
That's a lot of money that can go into retirement and savings and all that sort of stuff. So,
boy, we're practically brothers. Holy cow. Yeah. I haven't financed a car in about 10 years. And I mean, I don't think we ever financed a car that cost us more than like $150 or $200 a month. But man, it is just nice not having to deal with a car payment. So,
yeah, you can retire earlier.
Yeah, something like that. My goal is to be doing stuff that I love for the rest of my life. So I don't want to retire.
You have the freedom too if you need to, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the point, right? Is, I'm doing what I love. And then, I have some kind of accident or illness or something. And it's like, well, I can't do this anymore. Right. I just physically can't. Or something happens and I have to dedicate full time to taking care of one of my kids or my wife or something. Yeah, I have the option to. That's the deal, right? But
yeah, absolutely.
So those are my picks. What are your picks?
So, I mean, no one's going to be able to see this on a podcast, but like success is an iceberg. This is like my kind of thing about life. It's what I'm showing right now is like embroidery. I got this from Mauricia Stu. She's on Instagram. It's such a random thing, but a lot of times with like success and like job hunting, even writing, there's a lot of like times, especially for like blogging or whatever, where like it is not going well. You're wondering like when something's get done or like you got fired from a job or whatever. I really just always try to get people to like realize that life is hard sometimes, but if you persevere, you can do well. And success may look easy, but it takes a lot of effort and work. So
that's so true.
Yeah. And as far as like book series, there's a book series by Olin Thorensen, and it's called Destiny's Crucible. I believe he was like a researcher. It's about this guy getting cast off on like an alien planet, essentially, in the equivalent to like 1800s, and he has to kind of like, navigate his way in the world. So, anyway, it's such a interesting series. Not perfect by any means, but definitely a great series. I like authors. That's probably the biggest one. So like you like Brandon Sanderson, and he's very prolific about getting things done. He's very good about like telling you like when updates are. He gets things done. He finished The Wheel of Time, I believe, right? So he gets things done. What I like about like Olin Thorensen is he was an academic. He's published like hundreds of papers, all this sort of stuff. And then his like second career when he's getting older is like writing, and he's doing a really great job. Same thing for, in a different way, Alaron Kong. He does like lit RPG stuff. You've probably not heard of it. And his series, The Land, like he was an MD. So like he went through med school, and like he started writing a series. He did really well. I like people like that. They're just like really successful or really ambitious, where they have multiple careers or multiple things going for them. Yeah, my little tangent.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you can get links to the stuff that you talked about in the chat, we'll put it in the show notes. Sure. And thanks for coming. This was a lot of fun to chat about, fun to dive into. And thanks for coming.
And thanks for your time. I know I'm not a perfect guest in any way, and I hope people learn something from this podcast and grow in some way, shape, or form.
Well, I love the approach. I love being exposed to new tools. And honestly, some of it's just that, hey, we got real people on the show, right? I think a lot of times we kind of see the polish of like This American Life or something. And people think, oh, well, it has to be all perfect on the podcast. But what I find when I talk to people is that some people listen and they're like, I learned a lot. And I love that there's personality. I love that you screw up sometimes. I love that I can just kind of identify with you being kind of a guy from Utah, that your guests are just folks from other places, that you'll make a dad joke here every once in a while, right? And that I can learn something in the process, right? And so they're listening, for the information, but they're also listening because they feel like they got to hang out with you and I for a little bit. So it's all good.
Thanks.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up right here, though. And thanks once again. And until next time, folks, max out.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.